We're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, I want to take the opportunity to welcome everyone to Day 2 of DiverCity Week 2013, a celebration of lives in law in outer San Francisco. I'm just going to actually do a couple of quick announcements at the front end so that we don't run out of time at the end, and then I'll introduce Professor Baker. But before we do that, I want to take a moment to acknowledge a couple of folks. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge the two co-chairs of the DiverCity Committee. I'll have them stand up, Kat Tran and Richard Burchett. And then I see some members of the faculty and staff. You just raise your hand here. I want to acknowledge them for being here. Special acknowledgement to our fantastic speaker from yesterday, Julie Nice, who's in the back there. And then two quick announcements. First, I want to encourage you to continue to join us for the rest of the week. Tomorrow at 5 p.m. we have a special screening of Sowing the Seeds of Justice, a documentary about the life and times of Cruz Reynoso, who was the first Latino on the California Supreme Court. That's at 5 p.m. in room 101. And then on Thursday, we have a great event with Supervisor Jane Kim, who will be talking about why we need more women in law and politics, and that will be here as well. So I encourage you to join us for the rest of those events. And last, non-diversity related event, two announcements. One, we are continuing our Centennial Challenge. You're a captive audience, so I'll make this announcement. These sheets are out on the Student Boulevard. We are pushing forward with our drive to continue our Centennial Challenge. We've done at least 3,000 hours thus far, at least those that are logged, and so we're going to continue to do that. The next service opportunity, Service Saturday, is February the 9th, so please feel free to sign up for these opportunities. It's a great way to celebrate our centennial. And then last but not least, on Friday, February the 8th, we will be dedicating our moot court room, the judges' wall there. We have more than 30 confirmed alumni judges who will be here to celebrate the centennial. We're still accepting RSVPs for that, so if you're interested in coming, it's a great opportunity to meet some of our judges, mix and mingle and network and do all of those things, and also celebrate the law school. So if you're interested, please see me after. I'll give you the email address that you can send an RSVP to. And so with that, all announcements being done, I will take the opportunity to introduce our guest speaker today. And so today we actually have the unique opportunity to continue our Dean Jeffrey S. Brand Faculty Lecture Series, which we started last semester, but officially named last month, or actually a few weeks ago. Our speaker today is Professor Shalanda Baker, who joined the law school this year after serving as a Hasty Fellow at the University of Wisconsin School of Law. Prior to that, in addition to a number of other things that I think she'll get into, she worked as an associate at Bingham McCutcheon. She is an Air Force Academy grad and a graduate of Northeastern School of Law. We are incredibly happy to welcome her, and so I give you Professor Shalanda Baker.
Faces in here, and also some new faces, so I'm so happy to see you all. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to come and listen to me. For some of you, this will be your third hour hearing me speak. Thank you for that. I'm so thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be here before you in this hour. I'm also thrilled to be here at USF. Take a look around the room. Please, turn around. Look at yourselves. You're a beautiful array of individuals. I am so thrilled to be here for DiverCity Week. When I talked to Jamal about my topic, he said you can talk about whatever you want, so beware. The first question I got when I started teaching law was last semester, and the first question in the class was, why did you decide to teach law? Why did you leave practice? And I'm hopeful that today's discussion will at least shed some light on that answer, and also, or that question. And also, I'd like to raise an issue which has been needling me for the last few months since returning to San Francisco. Okay. So thank you, Jamal. Thank you, committee, for inviting me. Again, I'm really happy to be here. So this is a return. I was here in San Francisco about 12 years ago during the height of the dot-com bubble. That was a crazy time, but I think in a lot of ways this is an even crazier time. I was the age of some of you here, and so excited to be in San Francisco. I just left the Air Force. I was very excited to be in a place that was vibrant and alive and diverse. I experienced the boom and bust. I lived in the Mission, so I saw the way the Mission changed as a result of some of the money flowing in and out of the area. And I actually was here for 9/11, so saw the way in which 9/11 affected the economy and created a sort of bust effect with respect to the tech industry. When I was living in the Mission, I was also working for a nonprofit that served low-income students. And the nonprofit that I was working for was trying to close the achievement gap between students of color and low-income students and wealthier and white students. And that was my first sort of taste of social justice and what it might mean to create a world that was more just and equitable. And that was one of the inspirations to go to law school. So I actually left San Francisco in 2002, 11 years ago, to go to law school with this dream that I would fight for social change. And so I landed at a corporate law firm. The first time I ever set foot in a corporate law firm was actually for my callback interview. And it was quite shocking and quite overwhelming, but I did land a job at Bingham McCutcheon, which in my mind was one firm doing good work in terms of pro bono. They were out in the community. They really sold themselves to me in that way. And I found myself doing really fascinating work. I was working in the project finance group, which built energy projects. And so we were building energy projects all over the world, and I learned a lot. So I knew that it wasn't a long-term sort of enterprise for me, but I was there to learn as much as I could and just soak it up. And it was a fantastic opportunity. I was actually making preparations to leave the firm in fall of 2008 when I received a call that changed my life forever. So I got a call from the management of my firm, and they said, "Hey, Shalanda, we heard that you want to do international work. Is there any way that you would go to our Tokyo office and serve as the only U.S. associate in our Tokyo office?" And I was just like, "Can I leave tomorrow? I mean, hello, why would I not do that?" So I agreed to go to Japan, and I landed in Tokyo a week after Lehman Brothers crashed. And again, this was a very insane time for the world. There was a lot of fear, there was a lot of anxiety, and with one declaration, Lehman Brothers, again, their declaration of bankruptcy, changed the world forever. So that was the first sort of domino with respect to the financial crisis. And from there, we saw all sorts of things happen. So during the financial crisis, fear and anxiety became pervasive. Fear and anxiety was pervasive not only within the financial markets, but it was pervasive in the law firm. So I looked at my colleagues who were getting paid a lot of money, but they were so afraid of losing what they had. I looked at my family that experienced unemployment during this time. I looked around, I was reading the paper, and there was so much fear in the world. Everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. And of course, there was collapse, right? We all know that, and we're still feeling the effects of that. The dominoes did begin to fall in the fall of 2008, again, when I landed in Japan, and throughout the year, the next year, 2009. So we all watched as the US government bailed out 19 of the largest banks on the taxpayers' dime, right? We saw the largest American insurance company receive a bailout through the Troubled Asset Relief Program, so through TARP. And we saw over, I think one number is over $1 trillion, right? So we know that it was over $1 trillion of taxpayer money that flowed into the coffers of banks that were the precipitators of the crisis. And so, despite promises that were made by the government during this time, the community and local banks, so community banks and local homeowners, received very little of the funds, a pittance, a small percentage of the overall funds that were given as a part of the TARP. So during this period, we also saw the election of our first African-American president. So amid all of this hope, or amid all of this fear, there was hope. There was a glimmer of hope. And some say he took the job that no one wanted, but he's back in office trying to do it again. But there was hope. There was hope that maybe the world would shift, maybe the world would change. And I remember sitting in Japan and watching that, and not only was the US elated, but everyone around the world was hopeful that we would somehow change the course of the global economy, change the course of American involvement in various engagements around the world. Okay. So as I mentioned, I landed in Japan just a week after Lehman Brothers crashed, and I quickly became a bankruptcy associate. So I was an energy lawyer, a corporate lawyer. But I quickly learned US insolvency law and the Japanese insolvency law, which was actually quite new at that time. I was on the front line of cross-border transactions involving multinational companies and investment funds who were trying to save themselves. Again, remember, the fear and anxiety. They were trying to save themselves, save their investments, and restructure to protect their investments. And here is when I began to see the importance of lawyers, right? The important role that lawyers played in all number of transactions and the complexity of the world in which we were engaging routinely. And so I began to realize here that our skills were needed on a global scale to rethink the way that things were done, or simply reify the existing system that we had just seen collapse. So I witnessed that in Japan. But all the while I was still sort of hungry. I was still wondering what might be next, what might be my role. Yes, lawyers play an important role, but what can I do to make the world a better place? Because again, remember, I left for law school thinking that I was going to fight the good fight. And so what I began to realize amid this crisis, amid all of the anxiety, was that there was a tremendous opportunity. There was a tremendous opportunity to actually rewrite and recreate our global system. There was a lot going on. It wasn't just the financial crisis. We saw environmental harm. We saw all sorts of things happening and converging in this one moment in 2008, 2009. And for many of us, this was a time of hope. So rather than holding on to the conventionalism and holding on to business as usual, there might be an opportunity to let go and actually create a moment for change. And so after being in Japan for 10 months, I looked around and decided that it was time to take the leap of faith. And that I wanted to be a part of rebuilding a world rather than holding on to my job for dear life, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And so I got curious about what a more just, more fair, more equitable world might look like, and again, my role in creating that world. I wondered how I could use my legal skills in transformative ways as well. And in the fall of 2009, just a year after being in Japan, I took the leap of faith and jumped into the abyss. And so, into this abyss I jumped, with my only safety net being my law degree. And I, like many of you in this room, was the first person in my family to receive a college degree. I was the first person in my family to receive a law degree. And I'm now the first person in my family to be a professor, which blows my mind sometimes. So I'm very happy to be here. And I also want to recognize that I stand on the shoulders of so many other firsts, right? The first to integrate lunch counters, the first to integrate schools, the first to march, the first to do so many things. So I stand on their shoulders, and I am so grateful for them. I'm so grateful for them. And so, as I leapt into the abyss, you guys know how the story ends. Not only am I here, but you know that the sky didn't fall, right? The economic crisis continued and sort of dwindled, and now we're in a soft recovery. The government and the banks didn't collapse, so we know that. But in fact, what we witnessed during the Great Recession is this: a desperate clinging to a system that allowed highly sophisticated financial institutions to engage in profound risk on the backs of taxpayers, middle-class Americans. An unprecedented transfer of wealth from American taxpayers to financial institutions deemed too big to fail. And again, these banks took extraordinary risks at our expense. A recession that left 1 in 10 Americans unemployed. And 15.7% of African American men over the age of 16 unemployed. And given the profound segregation that exists and persists in our country, that means that we have entire communities of individuals where there is not one single African American man who is employed. And you can see this in New York, actually, because we think that's some other place. But let's bring it down to a city that we all know and love, that is the financial capital of our world, right? In New York City, half of the black residents, half, are unemployed, half, and spend a year looking for work. Just let that kind of sink in. Half, 1 in 2 African Americans in New York City spend a year looking for work. So we're in a recovery, right? We are in a recovery. And during this recovery period that began in probably 2010, we've also seen climate change move to the forefront, right? And we've seen, you know the data, 2012 was the hottest year on record in the US. Just this summer, we witnessed a severe drought in the Corn Belt that left wells dry and could have devastating impacts on the cost of certain common foods that we enjoy. And of course, Hurricane Superstorm Sandy this fall changed the entire tenor of the presidential race. And in New York City, we saw some of the most vulnerable residents suffering greatly and immensely as a result of Hurricane Sandy, and some of them are still suffering without access to things that we take for granted. And so, this is the world from which we emerge, right? 2008 to the present day. And I just want to take it back to me because, again, Jamal said I could talk about myself here. So I want to put a little bit of a glimmer of hope on this. So for me, the leap of faith actually has yielded many benefits, and one of them is being here in the room with you. But in the years since leaving my law firm, I've been privileged. So amid all of this turmoil and strife in the global economy and in the climate, I have been blessed to do a number of things. And one is I spent the better part of my first year after practice in Mexico. And in Mexico, I learned a lot. I encountered indigenous farmers who were fighting to grow corn from the same seed that they've used for hundreds of years. So fighting against the role of multinational entities in their specific fields. I also encountered farmers who were fighting the onslaught of all types of mega projects. Again, the very projects that I helped to build when I was a lawyer. And these mega projects were encroaching on their ancestral land. And from these farmers, I also learned of a wind energy boom, some of my students just learned about that today, that threatens to divest rural communities all over Mexico of their only way of life, which is growing food to survive. And so in the years since leaving my firm, I've also had the privilege of spending 2 glorious years in Madison, Wisconsin. Words you never thought you'd hear. 2 years in Madison, Wisconsin, but what happened in Madison, Wisconsin was incredible. In Madison, for the second time in history, the state held a recall election to recall a governor who was threatening to eviscerate union rights. And of course, that recall election failed. But there I witnessed for the first time, myself, in my very young life, the power of the people, to institute change. So indeed, these are exciting times, right? These are exciting times for all of us. And much has happened in the years since leaving Bingham. And here I am. So USF, again, a wonderful community. And I taught my first class last fall. Thank you for those of you who made it through that. And as many of you know, this is a tremendous community filled with diversity. And I learn from you every day. I really do. But since returning to San Francisco, I've also witnessed a city that is remarkably changed by the events of the last decade. The San Francisco I left 10 years ago, 11 years ago, was diverse. When I left the city, 14% of the population was African American. Now that number is just 6.3%. This is also a city of the extraordinarily wealthy. The median income is $72,000, $20,000 above the national average. $20,000 above the national average. And by one account, the average rent on a two-bedroom property in the city is $1,905 per month. But that number even seems low, based on what I'm hearing. I'm like, where can I get it? So the same report that throws out that $1,900 figure calculates that it would take the salaries of 4.6 full-time jobs at San Francisco's highest in the nation minimum wage to afford a two-bedroom apartment. 4.6 full-time jobs at our minimum wage to be able to afford that $1,900 apartment, and we know that that's maybe low. And another account puts the rental rates at $2,000 for a studio here in the city. And so that means that someone would need to make at least $76,000 a year, or $36.63 to be able to afford rent without spending over a third of his or her income on rent. And so these high rents have actually had the effect of pricing people on the lower side of the economic spectrum out of the market almost entirely. And I know that many of you know that, you're nodding your heads. And many have even argued that San Francisco has lost its soul. That it's lost its cultural diversity, its texture, and I'm struggling against agreeing with that account. But here we have a tale of two cities. Just a few miles away across the Bay Bridge, another story is unfolding. And in many ways, Oakland is a city in crisis. Last year was one of the most violent years ever seen in Oakland. It saw a 23% rise in violent crime. Unemployment in Oakland is somewhere between 12 and 15%, depending on whose numbers you rely on. 12 and 15%, compared with 6.7% in San Francisco and 7.8% nationally. So almost double. Almost double what we see here. And the communities in Oakland bear the stain of years, generations of disinvestment. And they also face deeply entrenched poverty. And yet the spillover effect from the San Francisco rental market is driving up Oakland rents, leading to fears of displacement, tension, and resentment. So now Oakland faces the highest rising rental rates in the country. Rents last year rose 20% in the last year. And now San Francisco's rents have surpassed New York as being the highest in the country. And so many of you knew that. And so why do I lay this out? Not only the global picture, the national picture, but here the local picture of inequality. Well, I think this is the world in which you will disembark, right? In just a few years, maybe this May. It is a world, maybe not May. There's no doubt in my mind. This is the world into which you will disembark. There is uncertainty, continued uncertainty in the global markets, instability, really, within the national economy, and profound inequalities here in the Bay Area. Profound inequalities. And while I can predict nothing about our future, especially my own, as you probably have already been able to tell, I can tell you this. These economic challenges will persist, and our legal system now privileges private capital as never before, which will lead to unforeseen impacts in our political system. The opportunities of folks without college degrees to ascend into the middle class will continue to dwindle. The consequences of 30 plus years of mass incarceration of African American males, 30 plus years, generations, will be felt in devastating ways. This is devastating. The consequences of persistently underfunding our public schools, will also have profound impacts on our ability to compete in the global economy. And our environmental woes will only continue to deepen. They will come into sharper and sharper relief with each passing summer and drought, and with each major unprecedented storm. So it is clear that we must change. And we will change voluntarily, or we will be forced to change. There's no doubt. So what does that mean for you? These are the challenges that you face, but within this moment of immense challenge is incredible opportunity. Now, like never before, is the moment to recreate, rewrite, redistribute, recalibrate, to refashion the legal system to allow for more justice and more equality. Now, like never before, is the chance to take tremendous leaps of faith. Yes, into the abyss with only your law degree as your safety net. Into the unknown. And now is the time to act courageously, I would argue, knowing that the fate of our world really hangs in the balance. And so no matter where you land, remember this. As lawyers, we are privileged to possess a skill set that allows us to sit in rooms with bankers, city planners, healthcare providers, legislators, union organizers, mothers, fathers, teachers, environmental advocates, children, and presidents. I would argue that this privilege, this ability to shapeshift, to act as interpreter, creator, translator, advocate, brings with it a tremendous responsibility. And I have no doubt at all that it is the lawyers of this world who will write our next chapter. History has borne that out. History has borne it out. Lawyers will play a role in rewriting the way that we think about our legal system, our structure. And so I ask, what role will you play? That's it.
I think with that, we will actually open the floor for questions about anything related to the topic or Professor Baker's background. So.
No, we're not opening up to my background.
Just to ask about your concluding remark about lawyers will rewrite, what about the people who are not lawyers? I mean, so in other words, I guess what I'm asking is, are you, I'm not saying this all, but going from the bottom-up approach in terms of using the educational skills? Because it seems right now lawyers are traditionally top-down approach.
Right.
So I guess my question is, in rewriting this, where will everybody else fall, in your opinion?
Well, so I think that lawyers are at every level of engagement. You saw it in Wisconsin. I mean, you see it everywhere. We're at the grassroots. We are at the organizing level. We're in the middle. We're at the highest level. So I think we'll be throughout, no matter what. And I think that's such a tremendous ability, right? Such a gift to be able to do that. You can ask about my background. It's fine. So were the numbers familiar to you? Had you heard the numbers kind of, you're saying no?
Not that $1,900 two-bedroom apartment.
Yeah. So Joe, you're shaking your head.
I didn't live in the city 14 years ago, so the drastic drop in African-American population over that time caught me off guard.
Yeah. I mean, so since being here, I've heard these little snippets, you know, that were shocking, and I wanted to sort of consolidate it for myself, so this is actually a really great opportunity to kind of pull together the data and see what's happening in the city. But it gets the backdrop of profound disenfranchisement in the East Bay, right? And to me, to put the two cities together and compare them is just remarkable. But yeah, the numbers are, for me, they were really shocking.
Do you think that California's unique voter referendum system aids in the perpetuation of the status quo and more segregation?
Interesting. So you have no faith in the ability of...
That was a leading question. So I guess considering like Proposition 8.
That's an interesting question. Do I think the voter referendum system perpetuates inequality? I don't know that I would make that claim. I don't know that I would make that claim. But obviously there have been some problems with that system, the example being Prop 8. But I think the point that I make about the role of corporate interests, right, in our political system is one that is relevant nationally. I mean, we don't know still what the impact of Citizens United will be within our global political economy, essentially. And I think there were a lot of surprises coming out of the 2012 presidential election, but we still don't know how things will play out. So I'm actually really interested in that question. But great question. Yeah, Jamal. You're back.
Yeah, Adolf, hi.
Adolf.
You talked a lot about your experiences, big law firm and going to Japan, and I would presume that in Japan, usually you're probably involved with like a lot of the big businesses that were out there. And then coming back here, I have a two-part question. So one, I guess your experience from however many years you left, did you see any kind of change in the amount of small businesses that kind of rose up?
In Japan or?
In San Francisco.
In San Francisco. Okay. Okay. That's part one.
Yeah, and I was just wondering, because if you did or if you did not, the way I feel like, at least through like my parents own a business, it's a small business, but I noticed that, along with a lot of other people that I know, what really kind of drives, at least San Francisco and the cities around it are just small businesses. And a lot of times you think of the trickle-down effect that the economic crash has, but no one really kind of thinks how much taxpayers' dollars ends up going to actually aiding those small businesses, when really one can make the argument against, but I would say that it really makes the backbone of how a lot of like unique cities work, in this case our city. So that's what I was wondering, if you saw kind of a difference, going back to the Mission District, you saw like a change in the amount of small businesses there, and perhaps how we as lawyers can go ahead and affect affect change in those communities. Right.
Well, so I haven't noticed a change. What I have noticed, and this is also a statistic, there's some discussion about a moratorium on new businesses in the Mission because of the number of restaurants that have been popping up. So this is the restaurant industry, but it's because of the displacement of small business owners in the Mission District that this moratorium has been proposed. And so I've seen the face of Valencia Street change. I've always lived a few blocks away from it, so I've seen that change in the last 10 years, and I've come back over the years. But with respect to the role of lawyers, so if you think about the financial crisis and the way in which the discourse was so heavily slanted toward saving the banks, right, and that the sky was falling. And then as an afterthought, it was community banks and local homeowners and businesses, right? So the people at the bottom were not really thought of until much later. I think that's where we have the power. We have at least one point of leverage, right? Changing that discourse and explaining to the rest of the world how supporting small businesses might actually create a more level playing field, or create more equity and actually sustain our economy in a sustainable way, as opposed to promoting the same entities that engage in risk that arguably are still engaged in that type of risk. So I think we have a role in terms of translating and figuring out how to change the discourse. We have a role even at the local level, I would say. So some of you are not going to be in politics, so if you're working with small businesses, you have a role in helping that small business be able to access whatever meager capital there is out there that the government has made available. So I think a lot of folks don't know what is even out there. Yeah.
Do you think the free market lends itself to exploitation?
Is this a leading question? question as well. Does a free market lend itself to, do we have a free market system?
Well, within the bounds of regulation, I think that, well, my personal view is that an unregulated free market does lend itself to exploitation, because isn't that the bottom line is, profit, and sometimes that often comes at the expense of something, and usually it's either the environment or people or principles or whatever.
Well, so, I think theoretically speaking, that is true. But I don't know that we've ever experienced a free market in this country. There's always been some intervention by the government, either to assist corporations or corporate interests or private interests, or to mitigate their impact. So I don't know that theoretically, yes, a free market is bad in terms of an unregulated, unchecked free market. And in certain spheres, that there are things that look closer to a free market in terms of risk-taking, et cetera, but I don't think in our country we've ever really seen that, and there's always been some intervention. So it's hard to know what a free market would look like. But that's a good question. Leading question.
So my last summer I worked for the mayor's office, and I worked on the African American Out-Migration Initiative that he's kind of spearheading, that's in the Public Utilities Commission. It's kind of like a handful of city employees that are trying to figure out what are some bulleted point things we can do to sort of change this really progressively, like, fast-paced change that's happening in the city. And I feel like it seems so, like, it's so far behind. Like, where do you even start? Because there's education aspects to it, and early education and in higher education, and then there's job components to it, but most of them are city jobs. You're not talking about how can we get more Black people into corporate jobs. That's not really what it is. And so I feel like for somebody who, like you, was inspired to go to law school to be like, how can I be like a change maker?
Right.
Like, where do you even start with something so pervasive?
Right. So, I think you start where your passion is, right? As an individual, you start where your passion is. As a system, it's a holistic approach. So, in my view, I sort of take the community development approach to thinking about equity and justice. But I think as an individual, you start where your heart is, right, and where your passion is. When I left San Francisco, I was interested in educational equity. And in law school, I learned that the road is long with respect to impact litigation. And the benefits of impact litigation are also sometimes not always felt. And so I got really interested in this question of the role of the private, right? The role of contract, the role of property, the role, and what contract might be able to do to create a more equitable distribution of resources. There are all sorts of questions that arise from that. But that was where I decided to put my energy, especially after learning that our court system is not always best positioned to create a more equitable world. But the bottom line, though, is where's your passion? And then there are theoretical questions around the leverage there. But hopefully there's some joining together of other people who have passions in other areas to look at the holistic picture. But that's a hard question, and a lot of people have been thinking about it for a while. Yes?
Good afternoon. Just to introduce myself real quick. Manny Ford's class of '85 here at the law school. Just wanted to comment on a couple of things. First is I love to hear numbers about Oakland and San Francisco. I came here to go to law school, and I spent a good 20-something years in the city. My first job was working in the Oakland City Attorney's Office for the first ever African-American woman, which was historic and it was awesome. Before working for Oakland, all I thought was what we all hear in San Francisco: kill zone, black men shooting and killing black men, drugs. what I found was that you have elements of that everywhere, but Oakland, looking beyond the numbers, having worked there for 13 years, is I think one of the most diverse cities in the Bay Area, and it has a very vital middle class of people of all races, colors, and denominations and everything. And the thing that made working as a lawyer very worth it to me was that anybody can take your skills and you can go and do so many good things. I volunteered a lot in public high schools in Oakland where the students didn't see lawyers, and it makes a big difference. The skill set that we have as lawyers is so tremendous. You can make such an impact every day of your life. So when you ask where to begin, you begin when you get up every morning and you think, what can I do today with this wonderful set of skills that I have? It is so powerful. We are the glue that keeps society together. We mediate conflict. We are the leaders of the world. The city administrator for the city of San Francisco is a USF law alum who never practiced law, Naomi Kelly. And so I think that sitting here today, I'm very encouraged by the questions and by your presentation, and I just want to impart on all of the students here that it is an honorable, wonderful, fulfilling career to have as a lawyer. We do the most courageous things in the world. Always be proud of who you are as a lawyer and go out and do good things. And you can be white, you can be black, you can be whoever you are. You take what you have with you wherever you go. So whatever job you have, I've worked for corporations, I've worked for law firms, I've worked for the city government. Wherever you have, wherever you go, you take that with you, and you have the capacity to do really, really good things. So for a person who's non-black, you can go to Oakland. Walk around Lake Merritt, go to Montclair, volunteer in high schools. You do not have to be black to have an impact on people of color.
Great point.
So the point is, enjoy it. It's a wonderful profession. You're in the right place. Do well. Go forth and have a wonderful career.
Yes.
I'd like to ask a question about global economic justice. You mentioned your experience outside of the United States. How do you find free trade agreements affecting other countries? Because depending on whom you speak to, people find them to be positive, yet a good number of people also say these are having devastating effects on the economies and the peoples of other countries.
Yeah.
Based on your experience, how do you find their
So based on my experience, my experience in the international world is limited to Japan and Mexico, right? And of course, I teach international development, so we talk about some of these issues in the class, and this is an area that is very near and dear to my heart. So the idea of global equity and equality and economic justice. And so specifically, to respond to your question about my personal experience, I found that in Mexico, the terms of the trade agreements were limiting opportunities of Mexicans to be able to grow food and to survive, because cheap goods were flowing in to Mexico, which was undercutting the profit margins for folks who had been growing food for generations. So exacerbating poverty, exacerbating inequality. And so that's one of the effects that's very real. And then of course the role of private investors and seed growers in Mexico was profound. And again, I encountered some folks who were fighting against this incursion because they could not keep their ancient seeds, right? They couldn't save seeds, which is something they've been doing forever, right? For generations. Because those seeds were undercutting different private contracts that they had within the area. So, yes, this is a huge question and a huge issue that I think we'll continue to see throughout. And the news is we actually need these things. We actually need the diversity of seeds. We need we need many of the ancient ways of thinking about preservation going forward as we move into a world with diminished resources and greater population. So I think, again, we can figure out a way to rewrite that, right? Reshift the discourse based on this emergent kind of need, I think.
I think we have to leave it there, but I'll give you the last word. And
So, again, thank you so much for coming. It is my joy to be here. As I said, I learn from you every single day. I have an open door policy or closed door, but you can knock if it's closed. Take my class, take corporations, take international development. Come see me. Thank you for having me.